Hey, what's up guys? Little man with a big opinion here. Today's video got me thinking while I was drinking my cup of coffee this morning. I've made videos about entertainment and how I think it is a comfort to have when things are away from normal. And I've mostly talked about board games and Magic the Gathering and books, stuff that can keep you entertained when you're waiting for things to go back to normal. But there are other, comfort items out there that can be discussed. As I go through this list, if there's things that you want to add to it, feel free, because all of our comfort items are going to be different. And some coffee in the mustache. And, some of us are going to have different wants and needs. Subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends and family, and let's go ahead and get into it. So I bring up coffee. It can be coffee, it can be tea, it can be, sodas, it can be adult beverages. That's everyone's got their own taste. Some people don't mess with any of that stuff, and it could be stuff that flavors their water. Anything that is not water can fall into that level of comfort items. All of it has varying levels of shelf life. I've stored a lot of the instant coffee because it's freeze dried. It's got basically an indefinite shelf life. And when it comes to the point of having caffeine, I've checked that box off. I also have the powdered milk and sugar, because I've drinking coffee black. It's okay, but I prefer to have my coffee looking a bit caramelly. Same thing with teas. Some people can drink certain teas just how they are. Other people add sugars. That's completely up to you. The flavored water stuff, liquid, powder, whatever. And I partially bring this up because a friend of mine taught me this 2 or 3 years ago, and I looked up a video again today on how to make it. And it's making a pine tea soda out of, a glass bottle with a stopper on it, pine needles, and sugar. Pine trees are excessively abundant where I'm at. So not only is it important to stockpile your stuff, you never know when the shelves are going to run out and you're waiting for them to be restocked. Hopefully some system comes back in place where we go back to normal. But I also think it's very important to know how to make some of this stuff. And if you don't know how to make it, or it's not really feasible to make it in your area, some level of trade is going to be reestablished. And you need to be making something else that can be traded for that thing. Salt at one point in time was a currency because only certain regions were able to produce it, and they were able to trade it for basically everything else that they needed. So if you're not producing anything, open up YouTube, buy some books, figure out stuff that you can make. The next comfort thing that I was looking at deals with personal hygiene. Most of us like to have a certain level of cleanliness, and we've got certain smells that we like. It can be as simple as you've got the toothpaste that you like. You have the bars of soap or the shampoo that you like. You've got baby wipes, and you've got some way of having, you know, warm or hot water. That's a comfort. There have been plenty of stories of, you know, people living through something terrible. It comes time for that warm shower, and they're in there forever. Just getting all the dirt and gunk off is like washing away the bad time that they just went through. You're cleansing your body. You're kind of restarting. So, it can be as simple as, like, I've got a couple of the solar showers. It's just a black plastic bag that when you fill with water, the sun warms it up. Having, I remember times where, the power was out, but the water was still good. Most of the places we live had gas, and I can remember my parents filling up the largest pots that we had in boiling water and filling the bathtub up so that the kids could take a hot bath. There's a lot of ways to go about this. It can be, a camping propane shower. It can be you're heating up water, having some sort of backup energy source that heats water up for you. Storage in a black container. Something that makes that simple task that most of us do nearly every day. I'll be the first to admit I've done tons of weekend campouts with scouting. Half the time I take showers at them. Half the time I'm like, it's the weekend, we're camping. But when I come home on Sunday, after I've unloaded gear and, talked with the family, one of the first things that happens is I go take a shower. And even on some of the worst campouts and places where we go that don't have showers, I've got to think of baby wipes. I'm, cleaning my armpits, my feet, my groin area, wiping my face off. Not doing arms or legs or anything, and I still feel loads better. Putting on a clean pair of socks or a clean pair of underwear. So the things that go into that is having the ability to clean and wash your stuff. I haven't done it yet, but I've really been looking at those RV washer machines that, they're about as long and wide as a microwave. They're a bit taller than that, but they use very, very little energy. I've even seen some of the foot ones. You pump it with your foot, pour water in it, and you can wash like maybe one full set of clothes in there. But cleansing yourself, big comfort thing. A lot of people would go absolutely ballistic if they've gone weeks without being clean, and all of a sudden they're in a spot where they can put on a clean pair of clothes. They can, even if it's a 4-minute shower, you feel like a new person. So you toss that in there. I mentioned one prepper I saw, they said, have a Kindle. Download as many books onto it as you can. I love that idea. I say get a Kindle. I also say get the physical books. Going the Kindle route, you've got battery packs that can recharge it. You have, some form of energy coming in. Whether you put up a little wind turbine, you've got one of those backpack, solar panels. If you don't want to worry about that, my grandma reread Lord of the Rings every year for about 20 years. My aunt has done the same thing with Harry Potter, basically since it's come out. People that read books, they typically have a series or two out there that they could reread dozens of times. And, you go to a thrift store, you spend $20 on, a handful of books. They could sit on that shelf for years. The power goes out, you light a candle, get out a headlamp, and you pick up a book that you've never read before. And it's kind of an escape. You can delve into whatever fantasy world or whatever fact reading that you're doing. It's especially important for kids. I think more kids should be doing more reading. So I have a huge combination of history books and fantasy books that I like to read. And then I'm just accumulating, the Dr. Seuss's and the Percy Jacksons and, stuff that I can definitely, if everything fell apart tomorrow, I have the material to teach my son to read. And I've got a pretty extensive library that, at the very least, he could get a good amount of entertainment from it. If you have delved down the path of, having some sort of backup energy. Another pet project of mine is I have a VHS player, and I'm trying to get all of the Disney movies that were on VHS. Everything I remember watching as a kid, up until I was about probably 8, and that's when the DVD became more popular and VHS was going out the door. We had hundreds of these things. And several of those movies we watched dozens of times. And having that physical copy of the thing is going to do you loads more good than having a digital copy. If you go the digital route, you're having stuff downloaded on multiple different devices. I've watched some videos where people have dedicated, whole SSDs to just downloading stuff. I've got a whole Google Docs of prepping stuff that some of it I've printed out and put in binders. Others I haven't. It's just a time-consuming, never-ending endeavor. But, having that stuff, I remember, I don't remember what season of The Walking Dead it was when they went to the prison. They had the generator, and they would do a movie night once a week. Almost everyone showed up to that. They would run the generator, long enough to do the projector and the movies they had in the prison. And huge comfort thing. There were some of these kids that, if you can imagine a world like that, where everything gets turned upside down, they've got to learn tons of new different things. And to let them go back to being a kid for a little bit is a very important thing. Like, I've considered pulling my PlayStation 4 back out and downloading as many of the offline games that I have, and then just letting it sit there. When I get the point of having the power available, I've got a little 24-inch TV that uses almost no energy. I don't really know what the wattage the PlayStation uses. And eventually, when I get a substantial amount of solar, that's going to go into that plan. Kind of going back to the coffee and tea stuff, certain food items. Like, I think having candy is super important. Having something sweet is going to be a game changer. Knowing how to make sweet things is going to be a game changer. I think also just knowing how to make decent food I made a video about spices that everyone loved several years ago, and just the importance of having more than salt and pepper. That's one of those things that, with the smallest prepping budget, they sell spices at Walmart. They've got some stuff that's 50 cents a bottle. If you can't budget in a couple of dollars, hopefully there's something that you can do to make more money. Hopefully you have stuff that you could cut back on. But, I know budgeting's hard. Things have gotten fairly expensive. But that's one of those small things that a little can go a long way. Most of your spices are going to last darn near forever. And so even if you're not, actively using it and burning through it now, it's not something that you really have to worry about replacing. And, this list can go on and on. Some people have, just think about stuff that you consume every day or, on a weekly basis, that if you didn't have that, you would feel more miserable. Some of our lists are much longer than others. Some of us have more expensive taste. So, you just kind of have to sit back, write down a list, figure out this kind of stuff, and, then figure out what is most important to you and set up some sort of plan of, creating a reserve of this stuff. Because after you've done that, that's the hard part. Actually, I think the next part's a little bit harder. Because the next part is determining how big of a reserve you want to have. Do you think things are going to be bad for a week? Do you think things are going to be bad for a month? Are they going to be bad for a year? Are things not going to go back to normal? So I want to have enough of this to survive my lifetime, which for some of this stuff would be a very crazy amount. You also have to start thinking to yourself, instead of buying this, can I make it? Is this stuff cheaper to get to make it? How much time goes into, creating that thing that I can then have the ingredients to make it? You're getting into the realm of self-reliance at that point. So think about this kind of stuff. Let me know in the comment section down below what you would add to your comfort list. Like I said at the beginning, subscribe if you like this kind of stuff. Share the videos with your friends and family. Like it if you enjoy it. Dislike it if you don't like it. And I'll catch you on the next one.